Hi. Everybody's got something to eat, something to drink? All set. Let me first echo what others have said by saying thank you. A lot of people have been very nice to me since I arrived this afternoon and said, thank you so much for doing this. And I'm not just saying this because my mother taught me to be polite. It is my honor to be here. David reached out to me and told me about this lecture series and asked if I would come here tonight and give the inaugural lecture, and it was in a heartbeat, no brainer, absolutely I will be there. I couldn't be more honored. So thank you for the invitation. Thank you for everyone who put this together. It's a great testament, and a special thanks to a foundation I've known for a long time as one that puts its money where its mouth is and invests in really meaningful things. So it's wonderful that the Hewlett Foundation is going to continue to allow this to live. I also want to say a special thanks to Anita's family. I have met her parents before. Rohan has grown 9 feet in a year and a half. Seriously, you are like huge, and you were not huge before. It's an honor to see you, and I hope that in some way I can give testament to who Anita was, but we all know that who you are is all because of your parents. And so thank you for giving us Anita. Anita died 10 days before I became the USAID administrator. I had been nominated 6 months before, but Washington is Washington. And a senator from Texas, whose name I won't mention, there's 4 letters in it, starts with C and ends with Z, held up my nomination not because of me or any concern about the agency, but as a purely political act. And when I read the news of Anita's death, I had multiple reactions. One was intense frustration that I wasn't at USAID yet to be with all of the people at USAID that were crushed and brokenhearted. She was absolutely beloved, not just in Washington, but in missions all over the world. The other reason is that Anita could have been me, or I could have been Anita. I lived in Africa for 20 years, wandered in and out of war zones, famines, difficult places, did it, I think, with the same spirit, if I'm not being too self-congratulatory. But it was a stark reminder that life is short and parents give a lot and sacrifice even more. I was honored to be able to hold the service that David mentioned when we were able to do something for the first time. Now, I will tell you it's not a service I got through without losing it a couple of times. We honored Anita and a young man named Zulhaz Manan, who was a USAID employee who was murdered in Bangladesh for being gay. But we were able, on that occasion, to put a plaque on the wall with Anita being recognized as our first partner to be honored permanently in the hallways of USAID, and that was indeed a privilege. So I thought a lot about, all right, what am I going to do here tonight? Now, this is called a lecture, so I could come and talk to you about global health and new trends and science and facts, and I would probably make a complete fool of myself because there are professors and students in the audience who are probably a little bit more sophisticated than me, and I can make up some of my global health in some forms, but it's probably not wise here. But this is the first lecture. So what I want to talk about is Anita's. Here's what Anita's do. They use their time and their talent to save lives and change the world. In fact, millions of people are alive today that otherwise would have died from causes related to poverty and preventable diseases if it weren't for the Anitas. Think about this. AIDS-related deaths have been cut in half since their peak in 2003. In half. No one thought this could be done. Last year, fewer people were infected with HIV than any other year since the UN started counting back in 1990. Back then, the global AIDS epidemic was decimating an entire generation, threatening national economies and undermining global security. But it was people, individuals, activists, doctors, and politicians. It was Anitas who stood up, got to work, and fought back. Thanks to those efforts, more than half the people who need treatment for HIV are getting it today. That's not enough, but that's a far cry from zero. And if efforts like this continue, we could see the AIDS epidemic controlled in the next decade, even in the hardest hit countries. That's what Anitas do. Since 1990, the number of children dying before their 5th birthday has also been cut in half, from 12.7 million deaths in 1990 to 5.9 million deaths in 2015. And in the same time frame, the rate at which women and girls died from complications in pregnancy or childbirth also fell by half, from 385 deaths to 216 deaths per 100,000 live births. These are real people. These are mothers and sisters and daughters and wives. These are children who are alive today because of Anitas. So why do Anitas do what they do? I think they do it because at every stage in life, girls and women living in extreme poverty are denied a fair shot. You heard David say that Anita wove together in her life health and human rights. You can't disassociate these two things. And you particularly can't do it for women and girls. They're less likely to go to school than their brothers, more likely to be victims of sexual violence and infected with HIV, and they are too often denied the right to own the land they farm or bank the money they earn. Simply put, as we say at the One Campaign, it turns out that poverty is sexist. For example, consider this. In the poorest countries, 4 out of every 10 girls are married before their 18th birthday. That's 39,000 girls who become a child bride every day, or more than 100 girls every minute. Young women aged 15 to 24 are 44% more likely to become infected with HIV than young men of the same age. AIDS-related illnesses remain the leading cause of death among women of reproductive age, 15 to 49, and in Africa, they are the second leading cause of death for young women. We won't end poverty or hunger or achieve universal education until girls and women everywhere are given a fair shot. And research shows that empowering girls and women not only ensures that they don't get left behind, they will bring their families, communities, and countries out of extreme poverty along with them. And that is why Anitas do what they do, because it brings about real, lasting, and transformational change. So we've got a lot of Anitas out there, and they do things for a good reason, but the fact of the matter is we need more Anitas. And I don't think we could do anything greater to honor her memory, her legacy, and her passion than talking about what Anitas need to do right now. Now, I left government where, actually, it turns out, if you play your cards right and you understand the budget, you can get a lot done. Yeah, if you don't understand nobody else understands the budget. So if you understand the budget, you can totally rock and roll. And we were able to do a lot, I think, in the Obama administration. Dramatically increase the number of people receiving HIV/AIDS treatment, led the fight with our partners in Liberia and Sierra Leone and Guinea to fight the evil serpent that was the Ebola epidemic. Saw massive reductions in child stunting, in maternal child mortality. And I left government, and it's like, okay, what am I going to do now? Well, the first thing, I slept for 2 months. The most fun thing was, I was one of those people I had wondered about for 8 years that I kept seeing outside at 10:30 in the morning in their gym clothes drinking coffee. I was like, who are those people? I was one of those people for 2 years. 2 months. Couldn't afford to do it for 2 years. As I say, I was in government for 8. So I had the honor of joining an organization that David described called the One Campaign. founded by a crazy, brilliant, passionate Irish rock star called Bono, who I've known for a really, really long time, which is hard because neither of us is that old, I think, but we've actually known each other for a long time. Both got our initial experience during the Ethiopian famine. I was on the side of the lines then during a war that saw 1 million people die that the world could have reached if politics hadn't gotten in the way. So we were both kind of born in this crucible of fire and rage, and rather than take our rage out on other people, we decided to do something about it. So the thing that made the most sense to me was to accept the honor of running the One campaign. And what the One campaign is about is several things. One, the simple belief that we can not only end extreme poverty, but we can build the world we want to see. Second, that to do that, we need to get people in the room who can agree on one thing. Now, trust me, I live in Washington. There are a whole lot of people I do not agree with on pretty much anything. Yeah, you can imagine who some of them are, right? But what the One campaign has done so effectively is build on something we learned in fighting the HIV/AIDS epidemic. When the leadership came from George Bush, the impetus in the Congress came from Senator Bill Frist, a Republican from Tennessee, John Kerry, you might have heard him, a Democrat from Massachusetts, and where there was overwhelming bipartisan support that the U.S. get out there and lead boldly on fighting an epidemic nobody thought we could even begin to tackle. And so the simple belief is, and it's hard, trust me, particularly in a moment we live in now, where things are as partisan and ugly and mean as I have ever seen them in my lifetime. The premise is find one thing we can agree on. Poverty is wrong. Poverty is bad, and we got to do something about it. The other is then mobilizing people to take action. And that action is to tell politicians that we will give you support if you show political courage. We will put pressure on you, and in an edgy kind of in-your-face way that gets right up to the edge of impolite but doesn't cross it. And we'll give you credit if you've got the political courage to do the right thing. There has never, in my view, been a more challenging moment for the cause of winning the fight against global poverty than today. Part of that is we've got such momentum, but the other challenge we face, I don't know if you've noticed, I think the world is on some kind of, I don't know, I date myself by saying it's on some sort of LSD trip or something. It's gone haywire. Haywire. The United States is withdrawing from the world at a pace that is unprecedented. The United Kingdom, which has been a leader in this, is distracted by Brexit. The European Union is facing a huge number of challenges born of Brexit, and then Spain's decided that they will have a moment as well. There is volatility in the global market, in the global body politic, that means for the first time in the years I've been working on this, rather than the trajectory of people coming together on this, we're at risk of it fragmenting. So there has never been a more important time to go out and actually do stuff. So I want to go through 5 things that Anitas need to do now. The first is to support our development budget. Now, I used to say that having a vested interest. I don't control it anymore. But you may have observed that when the president submitted his budget to Congress, the cuts to our development foreign aid spending were 32%. It was the most dramatic cuts we've seen in decades. And it was on the grounds that we don't really need to engage with the rest of the world. This is expensive. We're throwing the money away. Thankfully, members of Congress, both Republican and Democrat, said, not so much. We actually think that it's important. And it is hugely important. And it's important in ways that we know and you hear about their economic benefits when we invest in the creation of stable markets. It is in our national security interest that countries are stable and peaceful. But it also matters when we project our values. And I, for one, am going to fight back against anybody that tells me that isn't important. And I'll tell you why. There are people in Mali and in Senegal and everywhere else Anita worked who, because she was there as an American to help people, they have a view and an idea of Americans, regardless of who may be in office, as being about doing good and standing with our fellow men and women around the world. That is invaluable. I have seen it everywhere. The world knows people who never had a hope on their own of getting antiretrovirals know that it was the US that stood up. Now, even that money is at risk. And even in the back and forth on the budget, and we're fairly confident, we do a lot of work on the Hill, that Republicans and Democrats will come together to write a budget that doesn't include these crazy cuts in it. But there are still plans to even cut PEPFAR, the program David spoke about. And what happens when you start to cut that program and have fewer people on treatment? We go backwards. Fighting an epidemic, I've been involved in the fight against AIDS for a long, long time, and I had the experience of, for 14 months, having 2 meetings a day on fighting the Ebola epidemic. That was Christmas, that was New Year's, that was everyone's birthday, that was Saturdays, that was Sundays. It was like chasing a serpent. And in these epidemics, every time you hesitate, the serpent takes off. And that's what we're at risk of. So what you need to do is 2 things. You need to let your members of Congress know that you want their support for a robust, it's called the 150 account, the civilian budget. You also need to let them know that if they've got the political courage to support a foreign aid budget, you'll give them credit for that. It matters. It's what they care about. They want credit and votes. Turns out you run for office, you've got a healthy ego. Thank them. Give them the credit for having the political courage to do it. But the second thing is help counter the myths about foreign aid. One of my favorites is that some people think we spend as much, anywhere from 15 to 25% of the federal budget on foreign aid. As aid administrator, I frequently said, I'll take half that. I'm fine. It's less than 1%. But we got to push back on that, because that would, if 25% of the federal budget would be a big deal. Push back on that. The second thing, and particularly for those of you who are studying global health, and I know that there's some of you here because one of your professors told me that you were paid in points for being here, so don't leave early because I know who you are. Okay, what you guys need to do, and this is really serious, global health is the thing that has been the game changer in making the case for development. It has been the game changer. Why is that? We can measure it. We can measure maternal and child health. We can measure infection rates in the AIDS epidemic. We can measure child stunting. We can show that with the investments made with aid dollars and domestic resources and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and everybody else, there is a real return. We can show also in global health that once you get to a certain point, host governments are investing more money, and they are now investing in the health systems they need for sustainable health sectors over time. It is a win, and we've got overwhelming evidence to prove it. Help us tell that story. Because for everybody who thinks it doesn't work, we've got facts and evidence to show that it does. And for everybody who thinks it's not a worthy investment, tell them about Ebola and Marburg and scare them into it. But I mean, seriously, help use the evidence that we have to tell the story of why this works. The third is a hard thing to do here from Rutgers, but I think it's one of the most meaningful things to me, having had the privilege twice to be a public servant. I could not have done anything I did over the last 8 years if it was not for the career men and women of the U.S. Agency for International Development or countless other U.S. government agencies. Now, we've learned over the years to honor the troops. I grew up at a time when Vietnam veterans were screamed at, attacked, and disrespected for the decisions that civilian politicians made. Thankfully, we've learned that lesson. But the civilian men and women that work for our government, who are Anitas, are right now, I think, at great risk and being offered all the disrespect one can possibly find. I don't quite know how you do it, but if you can make the case for public service, if you hear somebody talk about those Washington bureaucrats, if you're in touch with a member of Congress, I come from the Washington, D.C. area. I don't have a voting member of Congress, so on my behalf also, make the case that we need to support these men and women. And I will tell you why. It's institutions that can change the world for the better that are at risk here. So I think another thing we need to do is champion all of them. A fourth thing is you can join us in doing something called Girls Count. So you can count girls. There are 130 million girls that are not in school. Over the next 18 months, we have huge opportunities in international events. There's something called the Replenishment for the Global Partnership for Education. In February, there's the G7 summit. Used to be the G8. Russia didn't do so well. Everybody got mad at Russia. Russia left. It's now the G7. Summit that's going to be hosted by Prime Minister Trudeau. And then there's the G20 that will be hosted by Argentina. These are meetings where big, powerful people get together and make decisions about the global economy and the future of people around the world. Education is likely to be one of the themes for the next 18 months across the board. So we're at a moment where, in the same way we've taken health and built progress and results and made the case that development works, we can now do that with girls' education. What you need to do is you need to go to our website, one.org, and we're doing videos of people for every number that goes up to 130 million, for every one of those girls that is not in school. At the end, if you're game, the zip code here is 08901. So we could take 8,901. You can all shout it at the same time. We'll do a videotape and we'll just make you all famous and put you on the website as part of Girls Count. But seriously, join this effort. This is 130 million girls. And what do we know about what happens if they go to school? For every year of education they get, there's an increase in their wages from 10 to 20%. We know that has an impact on the economy and what the net losses are if girls aren't educated. And we know there's a direct correlation to child marriage and having children in their teens. It's just like health. It's an investment in people's futures. So join us in that. And as you do it, David, you spoke to health here in the United States. Help make the point to Americans that we are not just talking about doing for other people around the world. I get this argument a lot that why should we do something for someone over in Mali when we have a problem here? No, we want that same quality education for everyone. So reach out and make those connections to people who are working on education here. But the other thing I want to ask people to do, I was thinking about kind of Anita rules, like girls rule, David rules, Rohan rules. So what are Anita's rules? And I would say we would all do a lot better to live by Anita's rules. So what does that mean? Let principles and not money or things or status guide your lives. I, like Anita, I was talking to her mother earlier tonight. I don't really feel like I work. I feel like I am able to pay my mortgage and buy more shoes than I should because my work is my passion. And that was true for Anita. But I think the way that happens is that when what drives you is principle, the desire to make the world better, the desire to fight for what you believe. Easy for me to say, I have not made millions of dollars, but I am pretty certain that the people I know that are driven in their lives by principle end up being far happier and more satisfied than the people that have a lot of stuff. Practice kindness, fairness, strength, and commitment. One of the things I heard about Anita from everyone is that she was really, really kind. That's a word we use a lot, but we practice a lot less. And it's that kindness and fairness that enabled Anita, or any Anita out there, to relate and connect to another person and walk with them to change their lives. Laugh whenever you have the opportunity, and even when you don't. I'm told by a good friend of Anita's that she had a very good sense of humor that was occasionally ridiculous, which is entirely appropriate, and that she found joy even in the midst of things that other people might see as hardship. If you ever fall victim to cynicism, as David suggested, you're drinking poison. Laugh. Laugh a lot, especially right now with where the world is. Laugh daily. Give to others however you can and wherever you can. Look, all of us here, I'm sure each of us has something we're worried about, something that's frustrating, some bill that's a problem, but we are all fortunate enough to be in this room and doing what we're doing, and we've all got something we can give to someone else. And that's what Anita did. She gave, and it wasn't, I don't think, because she thought she was superior or she was about charity. I think she believed in sharing, and that by sharing we can together change the world. The last thing I'll say is just go out there and live. She did. David, I told you I was going to do this. I didn't know her, but I know her. And I'm honored to even have had this little taste and touch of a woman who changed the world. So I would just leave you with one thought. Just please go out there and be Anita. Thank you.
You're going to take, yes, we're going to take some questions. Gayle's generously offered. Please come to the mic, ask your questions, comments.
We were talking earlier about, as you mentioned, the state of the world, how it's gone crazy. And there's the role that advocacy can play, but there's real world problems that are happening today that, as much as we want to have the political process play out here in DC, which is increasingly dysfunctional, how does the One campaign, recognizing the paralysis that is Washington, and how do students here at Rutgers tackle these challenges that are incredibly pressing and that people need help today?
It's a good question. It's been a bit of a challenge for us because this isn't a White House that has been terribly engaged on these issues. So what that's meant, though, is that there's still something called a Congress, and while it needs to act on a number of things on which it hasn't acted yet, I think engaging members makes a huge difference. The number of members who have told me about One volunteers showing up at their town halls or during their campaigns, we do this thing called One Vote, where One volunteers go to the meetings and say, and where do you stand on the foreign aid budget? And what are you doing about this and that? They're smart. They know their facts. They're polite, but they're persistent. And that really matters because at the end of the day, the president submits a budget request, the Congress writes the budget. So that's number one. One really exciting thing we're doing that was one of the reasons I was really interested in taking this job is building out one in Africa. We have a large and growing Africa team, and we have just crossed the line of 3 million members in Africa. And they are having huge impact on advocating to their own governments that they increase their investments across the board in health and in education and in other issues. So that's part of what we're doing. But I think a little bit about what happened on climate change. There has been a level of activism by governors and mayors and citizens who said the government may have withdrawn from the Paris Agreement, but America didn't. And if you look at patterns of giving, for example, in the United States for humanitarian crises and for development, the American people give billions of dollars every year through NGOs, faith groups, and so on. The number of volunteers and exchange programs where Americans are going overseas is steadily increasing. So I think we've got to figure out how, while we continue to press the government to do the right thing, I'm not holding my breath, but I've never been a cynic and I refuse to give up. I think figuring out how we organize to send the message that whatever our government, Democrat, Republican, upside down, straight side up, that the American people remain fully engaged. And I think, look, it works. I was an advocate. The park across from the White House is called Lafayette Park. The joke when I went to work in the White House for the first time was I had spent so much time in Lafayette Park protesting against the government that nobody thought I would get a security clearance. Truly. That's where I came from. And it works. And whether you do it from the outside or from the inside, it's hard, it takes time, and sometimes it's slow, but it actually works. And it certainly doesn't work if you don't do it.
Following up on that question, what do you tell a Rutgers student? Look, I'm a Jersey girl, Rutgers grad. Not a lot of global affairs background in my town or my family. Mm-hmm. What do you tell a student right now who's thinking, gosh, I want to be an Anita. I want to actually get on the ground and do that kind of work. What are the pathways you would suggest to Rutgers students interested in a career like Anita's?
The Peace Corps. We have a return, yes? No, seriously, our return Peace Corps volunteers are crazy good and committed. Seriously, it changed your life, right? Totally. And by the way, when you're talking to your members of Congress about the budget, put the Peace Corps in there. Massive bipartisan support, but I think even that is vulnerable at this point. So we got to speak up for what we want. I think the Peace Corps is one of the most extraordinary programs there is. I did my own sort of Peace Corps. I had a really stupid boyfriend, and I broke up with him and went to Africa. Seriously. And I lived in a village, and I had very little money. It wasn't the Peace Corps, but it was kind of the same immersion. So I'll tell you a quick funny thing. I spoke when I was at the White House to a group of young women advocates, and they asked how I got started, and I think in this career, and they thought I was going to say, from the time I was 6. And I said I had this really stupid boyfriend, and I broke up with him, and I went to Africa. And they tweeted, I was a senior White House official at the time, Gayle Smith says, break up with him and change the world. Like, oh, Mr. President, I'm so sorry. Anyway, but seriously, the Peace Corps, if you can afford it, a lot of NGOs, there are volunteer programs and internships. I think if you want to work in international affairs, and quite frankly, even if you don't, because I think you learn something that's invaluable when you're back here, I think going overseas when you're young enough that you don't have the financial obligations that you might have later, single smartest thing you can do.
Hi, my name is Angela Singer-Mersic. I'm here representing the Rutgers Global Health Institute. What would you say, how can the university interact with the One campaign? How can we collaborate?
Ooh, lots of ways. One is your Global Health Institute with lots of facts and analysis and data. And one of the things that I was at the other end of the One campaign, twice in the White House, and it was the single most effective advocacy organization I dealt with. Part of the reason was rigor. So I think that the work and analysis that is done in universities and institutes like yours is invaluable, because that's very persuasive when we're doing the advocacy. I think also involving students. We have a lot of campus leaders all across the country would love to talk to you about maybe having some sort of campus leader in the Institute of Global Health. I think we could look at that. That would be a great thing because we do these one vote campaigns. There's this crazy rock band that goes on tour. The volunteers go out and sign up more people. There are all sorts of events during the course of the year for volunteers. So we'd be happy to look into it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mansi. I'm a sophomore here at Rutgers. So my question is, I'm part of this student organization here called GlobeMed. A lot of what we do is raising funds throughout the year to send to a partner NGO. In our case, it's Change a Life Uganda in Majera, Uganda. So my question is, we're a group of about 40 students, and we're all very passionate about global health. In our meetings, we talk about current global health issues and you know anything related to what's going on in government and abroad, and we're all very passionate. But is this enough, and is this the most effective way for us to achieve the goals that we have as students? So what are your recommendations?
You know, I'm very much of the view that every single thing counts, right? So what you're doing, I think makes a huge difference, not only because it's going to affect people's lives on the other end in Uganda, but all of you, when you're no longer together and are out in the world, are going to remember that and learn from that. I think there are a lot of areas that are also worth looking at. Again, there are a lot of exchange programs that have started in the last several years because a lot of governments, and Uganda is a good example because they were early leaders in the fight against HIV and AIDS, are really looking at how do they build the health systems that can be sustainable. Part of what they need to do that is training and supplement the gaps in their healthcare workforce for a temporary period because they don't want to rely on foreign aid or expats indefinitely, but I think there's room there. I think the other thing is global health policy. You know, we've been at it long enough. I think in the early days when there was a lot done on global health, the main metric was the money and the aid. As the world has gone farther and achieved more and more results, the policy is a really, really much bigger piece of the puzzle. David was talking about the Mexico City, I think it was what's called the global gag rule. A policy this is a policy that a Democrat comes in, it's lifted, a Republican comes in, it's put back in. We play political football with people's lives. That's one of my major objections to it. But a policy like that has real measurable consequences that actually aren't political. You can have your political views, but you can show what the impact of policy is on a woman's lifespan or a child's survival. So I think getting into the policy makes a huge difference also because there are a lot of debates there. And consider public service. I never in a million years thought I would end up, truly, in government, but I think that's another big way. That's another big way to change.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's me making these buttons up there. Okay, I think we're good. All right, let me just close with one last thing. Thank you to all of you for coming out, but I want to end where I started, which is my thanks and respect and undying commitment to Anita's family. Thanks.